To truly grasp the immense influence of the Koch brothers and the invisible empire they constructed, we must journey back. Our story begins in the vast plains of early 20th century Kansas. In 1900, Fed Chase Koch was born, son to a Dutch immigrant newspaper owner and his German-American wife. His childhood in Quanah, Texas, and later Paola, Kansas, was a masterpiece in fortune hardship. He witnessed firsthand the rugged challenges of frontier life, yet also felt the potent promise of the American dream, a narrative that would deeply shape his worldview. His intellect led him to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he earned a chemical engineering degree in 1922. The world of oil beckoned. The 1920s oil boom drew him into refining. Fed keenly observed industry inefficiencies, seeing not problems but fertile ground for invention and disruption. In 1925, he co-founded an engineering firm, developing an innovative oil cracking process. This invention promised great efficiency and profitability, but success bred conflict. Established companies accused him of patent infringement. Dozens of lawsuits threatened to dismantle his burgeoning business. Facing 130 at home, Fed looked abroad. In the 1930s, he traveled to the Soviet Union, where Joseph Stalin was eager for Western expertise to modernize his nascent oil industry. In the desolate expanses of Sibir, Fed and his engines built 15 oil FNIs from scratch, enduring brutal conditions and constant surveillance by secret police. This experience profoundly radicalized him. He believed he had witnessed firsthand how communism ruthlessly suppressed individual liberty and property rights. Returning to the U.S., Fed developed a deep antipathy towards collectivism. This conviction would color his anti-worldview, influencing the values he instilled in his children. In 1940, after years of legal battles and dangerous work abroad, Fed used his engineering royalties to acquire a small Wichita-based firm, Rock Island Oil and Refining Company. He renamed it Koch Engineering. Fed immediately began building a vertically integrated enterprise, pouring investments into refining technology, expansive pipelines, and advanced chemical plants. With World War II, demand for fuel and industrial chemicals surged. His company expanded rapidly, weaving a network of pipelines and refining capacity across the Midwest. Fed's marriage to May Robinson brought 4 sons, Frederick, Charles, and twins David and William. The family resided in a stately Wichita home, yet Fed's parenting was anything but indulgent. He believed self-reliance stemmed from struggle. He put his boys to work, doing manual labor on the family's western Kansas ranch. They dug post holes, greased machinery, and rounded up cattle, often sleeping in unheated bunkhouses. When they complained, he reminded them of his own hard-scrabble upbringing, warning against softness. A staunch anti-communist and founding member of the John Birch Society, Fed often lectured his sons on the perils of big government and collectivism. Freedom, he warned, required eternal vigilance. The Koch brothers' childhood unfolded against a nation convulsed by economic depression and then World War. Their father's business thrived by supplying the war effort. But Fed remained wary of government contacts, fearing dependency. When he did accept federal work, he insisted his engineers deliver more than required, cementing reputation and maintaining independence. The boys absorbed these lessons. Though their personalities diverged, each internalized their father's emphasis on efficiency, discipline, and a deep distrust of bureaucracy. Frederick, the oldest, loved art and literature. Charles excelled in math and science, finding a demanding mentor in Fed. David and William, the twins, were ambitious and competitive. Growing up, the 4 brothers shared both the immense privileges of affluence and the heavy burdens of expectation. Their path was set, but their roles were not. When Fed died of a heat attack in 1967, he left behind not just a thriving industrial enterprise, but a strong set of principles and an unsolved question of succession. His will bequeathed equal shares of the company to his sons, expecting them to continue his work and his legacy of anti-communist activism, including funding the John Birch Society. His death was both an opportunity and a challenge. Koch Industries was poised for expansion, but the brothers had to decide who would lead and how to reconcile their divergent visions for the future. Beneath the skeletal outline of dates and decisions lay a rich texture of family life, heavily shaped by their mother, May Robinson Koch. Her influence was profound. A college graduate when few women attended university, May loved literature and music. She filled their Wichita home with books and classical records, insisting her sons learn piano and read voraciously. Dinner conversations covered business and philosophical debates about freedom. Fed assigned readings from Jefferson and Bastiat, quizzing the boys. May, by contrast, urged them to consider the humanity behind abstractions. When traveling, she took them to museums and concerts. May served on local hospital boards and charity committees, teaching by example that wealth came with significant obligations to the community. This unique blend of 17 discipline and cultured refinement produced a peculiar mix. 5 children, comfortable castrating calves in the morning and attending symphonies in the evening, a truly American dichotomy. Fed's experiences in the Soviet Union haunted him. He channeled his anger into activism, self-publishing A Businessman Looks at Communism in 1960. This pamphlet asserted America face to face with Satan, warning of Moscow's insidious campaign to infiltrate institutions. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and became required reading in the Koch household. Fed also became an early backer of the John Birch Society, hosting meetings in his living room. His sons heard stories of Siberian secret police and gulags, absorbing a visceral fear of centralized power. Yet, they saw the Earth's contradictions. New Deal programs brought electricity to rural Kansas, and again subsidies kept farms afloat. The boys learned to distrust Washington, but also that government could be both threat and benefactor. As teenagers, the brothers spent summers working on the family's Matado ranch. They rose before dawn to mend fences, brand cattle, and haul water in sweltering heat, forbidden from driving new trucks. If they shirked duties, Fed cut their pay. Yet, he also evaded clever solutions, igging a pump for efficiency or designing a tool to pull fence staples fast. This was practical leaning. In hindsight, Chales would cite these summers as his introduction to incentives and knowledge processes, the very seeds of his late management philosophy. Practical experience shaping future empires. May, in the journal, worried about Fed's harshness. She persuaded him to let them attend Boy Scout camp and summer theater workshops, reasoning exposure to diverse ideas would make them better citizens. His gentle interventions softened some edges of Fed's disciplinarian approach, but never diminished his core insistence that his sons earn their way in life. Self-reliance was paramount. The both brothers' formative years coincided with seismic national events: the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, and the Red Scare. Wichita, in the 1940s, was a booming hub for aircraft and oil. It was awash with money, yet deeply conservative. Local ministers ailed against New Deal programs, while organized labor fought for bargaining rights. These conflicts weren't abstract at the Koch dinner table. Fed exhorted his sons to read newspapers critically, seek hidden agendas, and question authority. By adolescence, each brother had a small library of libertarian classics and economic treatises. They may not have understood every argument in Hayek's The Road to Serfdom or Mises's Human Action, but they internalized the central theme: unchecked government could become tyranny. That conviction, tempered by May's example of civic engagement, would later drive their decision. They wouldn't just build an industrial empire, they would build a political one as well. After their father's death, the four Koch brothers faced the daunting task of running a complex and rapidly growing conglomerate. The weight of legacy was immense. Koch Industries generated hundreds of millions in revenue from refining, chemicals, and pipelines. Its culture mirrored Fred's engineering mindset: invest in research and development, reinvest profits, and avoid public scrutiny. Yet, the both of them's personalities soon brought tension to the leadership table. Their individual ambitions and differing interests would clash dramatically. Frederick, the oldest, showed little interest in business. Artistic by temperament, he pursued collecting manuscripts, preserving historic estates, and late became a prominent patron of the Eight. William, one of the twins, possessed a swashbuckling streak. He enjoyed acing sailboats, collecting fine wine, and counting adventure, a stack contest to his more disciplined boths. Charles, in contrast, was methodical and austere. An MIT graduate like his father, he earned engineering degrees. He deeply believed in Marx and Hayek's philosophy, seeing himself as a steward of his father's enterprise. David, William's twin, also attended MIT, sharing enthusiasm for engineering and entrepreneurship. Charismatic and gregarious, he relished socializing and later became a noted philanthropist with a passion for opera and ballet. Leadership succession quickly became contentious. Fred had appointed Charles as president of a subsidiary in 1961. After Fred's death, Charles argued he was best equipped to lead and expand the company. Frederick, disengaged, aged. David, seeing growth potential and ideological alignment, supported Charles. William, however, bristled, believing Charles was too controlling and sought more influence for himself. The seeds of a feud germinated. Over the next decade, Koch Industries expanded aggressively, driven by Charles's ambitious vision. Charles implemented market-based management, (MBM), a framework infusing free market ideas into corporate governance. MBM encouraged employees to think like entrepreneurs, rewarding value creation. Charles implemented market-based management, or 1MBM, a framework infusing free market ideas into corporate governance. MBM encouraged employees to think like entrepreneurs, creating value. This system fostered innovation and efficiency, but also demanded intense accountability. It was a rigorous, results-driven approach that shaped the company's ethos. Under Charles's direction, the company acquired pipeline systems, fertilizer plants, and commodity trading operations. By 1979, they purchased a crude oil pipeline company, gaining direct access to supplies. Koch Industries ventured into mineral extraction, anchoring, and more commodity trading, building a truly diversified empire. Revenues grew exponentially, but at a cost to family relations. As the company thrived, family relations deteriorated. In 1980, William, frustrated with his limited role, teamed up with Frederick to mount an attempt to wrest control from Charles and David. Allegations of mismanagement flew. The conflict escalated into a bitter legal battle throughout the 1980s. Lawsuits and countersuits flew between the siblings, culminating in a brutal fight over the valuation of their shares. Family was erupted. Ultimately, in 1983, Charles and David bought out William and Frederick's stakes for a reported $1.1 billion, giving them majority control. But William felt shortchanged. William continued to litigate, culminating in a 1997 federal court case. Though he won a modest sum, Charles and David retained control. The episode left lasting scars, making family gatherings awkward. William poured his energies into his own ventures, successfully winning the America's Cup. Frederick continued his life as a collector and philanthropist, largely estranged from his brothers. Their paths diverged sharply. Frederick, educated at Harvard and Yale Dharma, was drawn to at preserving historic properties and collecting rare manuscripts. William, with Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard Business DGs, channeled his dive into Oxbow, Cabot, and Menils. Oxbow grew into a significant trading firm, making William a billionaire. A passionate sailor, he skippered the yacht that won the 1992 America's Cup, a triumph he called his life's pinnacle. His tastes ran to the flamboyant. Chales, meanwhile, immersed himself in engineering and economics, a quadruple Massachusetts Institute of Technology graduate. He was fascinated by how complex systems could be imposed, through feedback and incentives, studying Austrian economists and Deming. Combining these influences, Chales developed MBM not just as a slogan, but a formal system with 5 dimensions: vision, virtue, and talents, knowledge processes, decision rights, and incentives. An evolutionary approach. Vision meant articulating purpose. Virtue and talents meant hiring right. Knowledge processes, shared information. Decision rights empowered, and incentives aligned compensation with value created. It was a holistic system. MBM encouraged internal markets, with divisions acting as separate businesses. Bureaucratic titles were de-emphasized in favor of contribution. New employees attended week-long MBM seminars, absorbing this philosophy. Over time, MBM became as central to Koch Industries' identity as its pipelines and refineries. It was the operating system for a growing industrial behemoth. David, the most outgoing brother, combined technical acumen with charisma. After Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he joined Koch Industries in the 1970s, developing New York ventures. He survived a horrific 1991 plane crash, pulling survivors from the burning fuselage. The experience, leaving him with chronic pain, deepened his interest in medical research and philanthropy. He loved the arts, serving as a trustee for ballet and museums, enjoying a social life contrasting with Charles's aestheticism. Though aligned with Chales on economic policy, David diverged on social issues, endorsing same-sex marriage and a woman's right to choose, reflecting his view that personal freedoms should be broad. These differences would later broaden the network's appeal. The fatal lawsuits of the 1980s and 90s. We, in Pat, a clash of these distinct personalities. William and Frederick accused Chales of advocacy and denying FIE dividends. Chales and David countered that they both sought to cash out prematurely, jeopardizing company stability. Depositions aired private grievances, Chales threatening William allegedly sabotaging contracts. The father had precisely warned in his will that his sons might tear the business apart by bickering. The prophecy seemed to come true, a tragic testament to their deep division. The litigation consumed management time and created tension among employees, fearing a breakup. To finance the 1983 buyout, Charles and David took on debt and sold assets, delaying some investments. Yet, the ordeal also solidified their partnership. Having defended their vision against family challenges, Chales and David emerged with unchallenged authority to pursue their ambitious agenda, a strong, united front. In the aftermath, William channeled his energy into Oxbow and passion projects, desalination, archaeological digs, museums focusing on Western history. Frederick organized opera symposia and donated his estates to cultural foundations. In late years, a détente of sorts emerged at family reunions, discussing grandchildren and memories rather than business. But the scars remained. The saga underscored the complexities of managing a family fortune. The split resulted in two very different legacies, one of industrial and political influence, the oath of adventure and eccentricity, both rooted in the same austere Kansas childhood, yet flowing in divergent directions. The feud highlighted the tensions between dynastic wealth and personal ambition. Charles and David, now at the helm, channeled their inheritance into building a corporate juggernaut and a political network reaching deep into American society. In the process, they transformed their father's firm from a regional refining into one of the largest private companies in the world, becoming figures both immensely influential and highly controversial. From the 1980s onward, under Charles and David's leadership, Koch Industries embarked on relentless expansion. The brothers diversified holdings to hedge against market fluctuations and regulatory risk, reinvesting nearly all profits. By the early 21st century, Koch Industries was present in diverse sectors: refining, chemicals, polymers, fibers, fertilizers, pulp and paper, glass, electronics, and anchoring, a truly sprawling conglomerate. Each acquisition reflected a strategic logic: control supply chains, innovate within each industry, and exploit synergies between seemingly disparate businesses, a masterclass in industrial strategy. One of the earliest major acquisitions was Georgia-Pacific in 2005 for $21 billion, then one of America's largest corporate takeovers. It brought brands like Bonnie and Dixie into the Koch portfolio, diversifying beyond energy. In 2004, they purchased Invista, a DuPont spin-off, for $4.2 billion, adding brands like Lycra and Cordura. This deal gave them expertise in synthetic fibers used in everything from clothing to industrial equipment. In 2013, Koch acquired Molex, an electronic components manufacturer, for $7.2 billion. Molex's connectors are found in smartphones and Mac computers. Through these, Koch Industries became a diversified industrial powerhouse. By 2017, the company completed its acquisition of Koch Industries, a Michigan-based glass manufacturer, cementing its position in construction materials and automotive glass. They each grew exponentially. In agriculture, Koch Ag and Energy Solutions developed, operating subsidiaries like Koch Fertilize, Methanol, and Energy Services, supplying fertilizers globally, producing methanol, and trading natural gas. The vertical integration of energy, chemicals, fertilizers, and trading allowed Koch Industries to profit at every stage of the commodity cycle. They engineered maximum profitability. The magnitude of Koch Industries' growth is hard to overstate. By the mid-2025s, it employed over 120,000 people in 50-plus counties, generating annual revenues estimated at $125 billion, second only to Cargill among U.S. private companies. The company's internal culture, molded by MBM, evaded innovation. Employees were encouraged to act like owners, and the firm boasted of reinvesting 90% of earnings to spur long-term growth across its vast array of products. Its operations made Koch Industries ubiquitous. When you used paper towels, tapped a smartphone, sat in a car with an airbag, or ate food grown with fertilizer, chances were Koch's supply chains were involved. Yet, the company's growth came with controversies. Numerous subsidiaries were cited for environmental violations, from oil spills to toxic releases, a dark side to the empire. In the 1990s, the EPA accused Koch Petroleum Group of discharging excessive benzene, resulting in a record civil fine. In 2000, Koch Industries admitted violating the Clean Water Act, facing fines for leaking crude oil. Critics charged that the company's obsession with profit and disdain for regulation encouraged cutting corners. Koch's defenders argued the firm invested in innovative environmental technologies and improved compliance over time. Regardless, the company's huge scale meant that any misstep had enormous consequences for workers, communities, and ecosystems. Its footprint was too vast to ignore. The wealth generated by Koch Industries enriched Charles and David enormously. By the 2000, each was listed among the world's wealthiest individuals, their net worth in the tens of billions of dollars. With the financial resources of a mid-sized county at their disposal, the brothers were poised to exert outsized influence far beyond the borders. They would channel that power to remake American politics, economics, and culture. Koch Industries' dominance relied not only on headline acquisitions, but on building a seamless supply chain from wellhead to consumer. They modernized refineries, wove pipelines, and developed a trading arm. Refining supplied polymers for electronics. Fertilized plants served farms whose crops ended up in other Koch products. Glass factories, pulp mills, and anchors illustrated their portfolio's breadth, all under MBM. By the early 21st century, this tightly integrated system stretched across 50-plus counties, supported by investments in tech firms and clean energy startups, preparing for a digital and low-carbon future. The result was an industrial ecosystem capable of absorbing shocks and a corporate culture that prized entrepreneurial initiative, all while remaining under the tight control of the Koch family, a powerful, self-sustaining entity. Koch's antipathy toward communism and government regulation planted early seeds of political activism. In the 1960s and 70s, Charles and David began exploring libertarian philosophy, seeking foundational principles. Charles devoured works by Ayn Rand, Ludwig von Mises, and F.A. Hayek, concluding that individual liberty and fee maquettes we paramount for human flourishing. These we his guiding stars. David shared these views, albeit with a more socially liberal bent. He supported same-sex marriage and abortion rights, reflecting his belief that personal freedoms should be broad, a nuanced approach. Unlike their father, who funneled resources into the John Birch Society, the brothers sought a more sophisticated apparatus to spread their ideas, one that could reshape intellectual discourse. In the early 1970s, Charles helped found the Center for Independent Education, later known as the Cato Institute. Cato provided intellectual ammunition for deregulation, free trade, and reduced taxes. Charles seized on Cato's boat and funded its operations. He also underwrote the Institute for Humane Studies, which offers fellowships and internships for libertarian scholars, cultivating future thought leaders. In 1985, the brothers, with economist Richard Fink, launched Citizens for a Sound Economy, CSE, a free market advocacy group. CSE organized grassroots campaigns opposing perceived government overreach. These early efforts were relatively low profile compared to the late political machine, but they established a crucial pattern, funding intellectual infrastructure to shift political discourse towards smaller government. The both brothers even waded briefly into electoral politics. In 1980, David Koch ran for vice president on the Libertarian Party ticket. Their radical platform called for abolishing the FBI, CIA, Social Security, and public schools. David's candidacy was partly an effort to circumvent campaign finance limits, allowing him to contribute unlimited funds. He reportedly spent over $2 million of his own money. The ticket secured just over 1% of the vote. The experience left the both disillusioned. They concluded votes cared more about personalities than policies, and that lasting change required shifting the intellectual climate, not just winning at the ballot box. Charles, in particular, came to believe the most effective way was to fund scholars, activists, and institutions that could shape public opinion over decades. Thus began the long-term strategy of building a network, sometimes dubbed the Kochtopus. The aim was not merely to elect specific candidates, but to change the very frame of public debate. If the intellectual soil could be fertilized with free market ideas, politicians would naturally gravitate toward Koch's worldview. This ambitious strategy equipped patience, discipline, and, critically, money. The Koch brothers possessed all three, ready to commit to a multi-decade project of influence. Charles's intellectual journey didn't occur in a vacuum. The late 60s and 70s were years of upheaval. Geet society pogroms, Nixon's controls, new environmental regulations, and the Arab oil embargo confirmed his father's wanings. They saw government intervention causing shortages, inflation, entangling business in red tape, and stifling innovation. In response, Charles immersed himself in the canon of classical liberalism, seeking solutions. He devoured Hayek's The Constitution of Liberty, Rand's Atlas Shrugged, and Buchanan's public choice theory. These texts reinforced his belief: limit government and cultivate a culture that valued enterprise. David, while sympathetic, tempered his brother's ego with a practical awareness that politics required compromise. Even their early forays into the libertarian movement were not without conflict. When Charles helped found the Cato Institute, disagreements quickly arose. Rothbard favored radical positions and confrontational tactics, while Charles wanted a more pragmatic approach to appeal to business leaders. The dispute culminated in 1981, when Charles and David attempted to assert more control over Cato's board. Kane assisted, leading to a split. Charles withdrew funding, ejecting Isusis to Reason and Heritage foundations. The episode taught them that ideological purity could be counterproductive. Building a durable movement required professional management and a disciplined message. They learned to play the long game. Richard Fink, a free market economist who joined Koch Industries in 1979, provided a blueprint for scaling their political project. His Structure of Social Change memo laid out a multi-level strategy. Fink argued lasting policy change required interventions at three levels: intellectuals, policy entrepreneurs, and grassroots activists. Universities would produce ideas, think tanks would craft policy, and citizen groups would mobilize votes. Fink likened this to a supply chain. Without scholars, think tanks lacked substance. Without advocacy groups, policies languished. This vertically integrated approach became the very architecture of the Kochtopuses. The both funded professorships and academic programs to train liberalian scholars, then created policy shops like the Marcus Center to craft model legislation, and finally invested in grassroots organizations to apply pressure. Metrics and accountability were built in. Grants came with performance expectations evaluated by their influence on legislation and public opinion. The goal: a long march through the institutions, slowly shifting the Overton window of acceptable discourse. In the early 2000s, as the Republican Party embraced costly wars and expanded Medicare, Charles and David grew disillusioned with what they saw as big government conservatism. They sought a different path. They decided to invest more heavily in building an infrastructure outside the RNC. In 2003, they convened the first of their semi-annual donor summits, bringing together wealthy individuals sharing their libertarian leanings. These gatherings, held at exotic hotels under strict confidentiality, allowed the Kochs to coordinate millions in donations toward a common agenda. Attendees received strategic updates, admonished not to share details. Over time, the network expanded to include hundreds of donors, many from fossil fuel, finance, and manufacturing. Its secrecy became legendary, destroying paperwork, avoiding email, using white noise machines to prevent eavesdropping. Critics compared it to a shadow party operating outside normal political channels. The centerpiece of the network's public engagement became Americans for Prosperity, AFP, an advocacy group evolved from CSE, was not edited as there were no numbers to convert to words. AFP established chapters in dozens of states, training activists to lobby legislators, organize allies, and canvass votes. It promoted reduced taxes, opposition to environmental regulations, and privatization of public services. AFP's grassroots venue, however, hid the fact that it was bankrolled by wealthy donors, funds funneled, though Koch-affiliated non-profits. It was a sophisticated, well-funded machine disguised as a popular movement. In the run-up to the 2010 midterms, AFP spent tens of millions on advertising and mobilization, targeting lawmakers who supported the Obama administration's healthcare, reform, and cap-and-trade legislation. The organization helped coordinate town hall protests against the Affordable Care Act and funded issue ads attacking Democratic candidates. They were on the offensive, relentlessly. Another key node in the Kochtopus was Freedom Partners, established in 2011 as a Chamber of Commerce-style trade association. It coordinated funding across allied groups, distributing grants to a suite of organizations. It served as a hub where donors could direct money anonymously, shielding them from public scrutiny. The network included specialized groups like Concerned Veterans for America, the Libra Initiative, and Generation Opportunity. Each organization was designed to cultivate specific constituencies without overtly branding itself as a Koch entity, allowing a broad, subtle reach into various demographics. The network's influence became most visible during the rise of the Tea Party movement in 2009 and 2010. Though spontaneous, the Koch network seized the moment to amplify its message. Americans for Prosperity provided organizing resources, bus tours, and training to Tea Party activists. AFP staff coordinated allies, wrote talking points, and connected local leaders with media outlets, providing vital infrastructure. The movement's decentralized structure aligned well with the Koch's belief in bottom-up activism. While the Tea Party's energy seemed organic, its infrastructure was often supplied by Koch-funded groups, magnifying its influence and electing a wave of Haddite candidates. These new lawmakers, many owing their seats to Tea Party momentum, were sympathetic to Koch policy goals, like cutting taxes and opposing environmental regulations. The effects were long-term and profound. The Kochtopus also invested heavily in state politics. The bother understood much policy was made in state legislatures and regulatory agencies, where modest investments could yield outsized returns. Though AFP, they targeted governors' offices, ballot initiatives, and legislative campaigns. They funded efforts to restrict public sector unions, like those supporting Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker's fight to curtail collective bargaining. In 2012, the network pledged to spend up to $60 million to defeat President Barack Obama. It funded think tanks drafting model legislation, curtailing environmental regulations, weakening voting rights, and expanding school vouchers. By 2014, the network claimed it would raise nearly $900 million for the coming election cycle, rivaling the RNC's budget. Secrecy remained a hallmark. Donor names hidden, mobile devices left behind. When a partial list of donors from a 2010 summit leaked, analysts found many came from industries that stood to benefit from deregulation: oil and gas, coal, finance, and manufacturing. The self-interest was clear. The Kochtopus's web of organizations allowed money to flow in ways difficult for regulators to trace, fueling allegations that the Koch brothers had built a shadow political apparatus accountable to no electorate. What began as a handful of wealthy libertarians meeting in a Chicago hotel room in 2003 soon grew into a sophisticated operation. They discussed the 2004 election, lamented Republican spending, and pooled resources. Within a decade, the summits, held twice yearly at resorts like the Bodmu, attracted hundreds of attendees, each expected to contribute at least $100,000 to the network's causes. The scale was unprecedented. Sessions featured briefings from political strategists, policy experts, and lawmakers. Donors were presented with prospectuses detailing funding needs, and pledges were made privately, then allocated according to strategic priorities. To maintain confidentiality, participants wore color-coded name tags, and white noise machines hummed. Despite the secrecy, leaked agendas occasionally revealed discussions on climate policy, redistricting, and vote mobilization. The donor network financed a lattice of organizations across ideological trenches, including the State Policy Network, SPN, linking free market think tanks in all 50 states, and the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. ALEC, supported by Koch funding, brought together corporate lobbyists and state legislators to draft bills. Many controversial laws, from stand-your-ground statutes to vote ID requirements, originated in ALEC task forces. These bills often advanced under the ADA until multiple states adopted them simultaneously, revealing a highly coordinated strategy. It was a stealthy, effective method of policy diffusion. Americans faux possibility grew into a formidable machine. By 2010, AFP boasted over 30 state chapters and claimed to have mobilized 2 million activists, though critics argued that definition was elastic. The organization and citizen training academies, teaching volunteers how to speak at city council meetings, call into radio shows, and knock on doors. During election cycles, AFP buses crisscrossed swing districts. AFP waged obscure battles, opposing local transportation taxes, supporting charter school expansions, and fighting municipal broadband projects. Its message discipline was striking: less government, lower taxes, more economic freedom, always. Because AFP operated under 501(4) status, it could engage in political advocacy without disclosing donors. Between 2007 and 2010, it reportedly spent over $45 million on federal and state races, a sum larger than most unions. Freedom Partners served as the network's bank and nerve center, organized as a trade association. A $100,000 annual fee granted membership and a seat at the table. Some donors gave much more. Freedom Partners dispersed grants to dozens of groups. It also oversaw i360, a data analytics firm that compiled detailed vote profiles using commercial data and behavioral modeling. A true data-driven political operation. Campaigns allied with the Koch network used i360's databases to micro-target persuadable votes. The network built its own advertising agencies, telemarketing centers, and canvassing technologies, operating independently of the Republican Party. The secrecy shrouding the Kochtopus bred suspicion. To further cloak donations, the Kochs and allied donors used donor-advised funds like Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund. These funds allowed contributors to deposit money distributed to approved conservative and libertarian causes, with only the fund's name appearing on tax filings. Critics likened this to political money laundering. Defenders counted that anonymity protected donors from harassment, and that liberal philanthropists used similar structures. The controversy underscored the broad debate over transparency versus privacy in political giving. When Barack Obama was elected president in 2008 and Democrats gained control of Congress, the Koch bodies viewed it as an existential threat. The financial crisis had discredited laissez-faire economics. The new administration proposed sweeping reforms: a stimulus, cap and trade, healthcare expansion, and tighter financial regulation. Charles and David saw an opportunity to galvanize opposition, framing it as a march towards socialism. Though the Kochtopus, they mounted what some observers called an all-out offensive against the Obama administration. Americans for Prosperity organized nationwide protests against the proposed cap-and-trade legislation. The group mobilized activists to pack town hall meetings and persuade members of Congress to oppose the Affordable Care Act. AFP's Hands Off My Healthcare campaign saturated airwaves with ads warning of a government takeover. When House Democrats passed climate legislation in 2009, AFP targeted vulnerable senators to block it. The Kochtopus also supported lawsuits challenging the federal government's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The Tea Party's rise provided the Koch network with foot soldiers. Grassroots activists, motivated by anger, found support in Koch-funded training sessions, bus tours, and leadership conferences, amplifying their message. AFP's conferences featured conservative celebrities and offered workshops on organizing protests, using social media, and lobbying legislators. Many Tea Party activists may never have heard of the Kochs, but they benefited from the network's infrastructure. In 2010, Tea Party candidates won dozens of seats, shifting the Republican caucus to the right, making it more hostile to compromise. By 2014, Republicans controlled both chambers of Congress and a majority of state legislatures. At the state level, the Kochtopus targeted policy fights that actually made national headlines but had lasting impact. In Wisconsin, Americans for Prosperity spent about $700,000 on ads supporting Governor Scott Walker's legislation. This legislation, limiting public sector unions, triggered massive protests and a recall election. The network spent millions to defend Walker and similar efforts in other states, proving their commitment. In North Carolina, Koch-backed groups helped push for tax cuts and restrictions on voting, moves critics said disproportionately affected minority and low-income voters. Their influence was felt directly. The network's influence extended into judicial elections, funding candidates for state Supreme Courts seen as friendly to business and hostile to regulation. Shaping the judiciary was a long-term goal. During Obama's second term, the Koch network continued to fight environmental regulations. The EPA's Clean Power Plan became a particular target. Koch-funded groups sponsored campaigns casting doubt on climate science. Researchers documented that from the late 90s to mid-2010s, the Koch booths funneled tens of millions to organizations disputing climate science. Critics labeled them leading figures in the climate change denial movement. The brothers maintained that their support for such groups was consistent with their belief in economic freedom and skepticism of government intervention, framing it as principled rather than self-serving. The political influence of the Koch network during the Obama years was substantial. By 2015, the network had helped Republicans gain control of 30 state legislatures and 31 governorships. They truly shaped the political map. Yet, the network also began to face increased scrutiny. Investigative journalists exposed the scale and secrecy of the donor summits. Democratic politicians made the Koch brothers a central plank of fundraising pitches, portraying them as symbols of dark money. Jane May's book, Dark Money, explored how the Koch network shaped the Republican Party. The term Koch brothers became shorthand for campaign finance flaws. The Obama-era, however, only solidified the Kochs' resolve. When Congress passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, in 2008 to bail out banks and automakers, the Kochs balked. They viewed government rescues as a moral hazard, evading failure and saddling taxpayers with debt. Americans for Prosperity launched No Mo Bailouts Allies, arguing markets should be allowed to correct themselves. Although TARP passed, the backlash seeded the Tea Party movement, providing a new platform for the message. AFP and FreedomWorks provided logistical support to early tax day protests in April 2009, where attendees waved "Don't Tread on Me" flags and demanded spending cuts. It was a potent fusion of anger and ideology. While the protests attracted a motley coalition of libertarians, social conservatives, and conspiracy theorists, The Koch network saw an opportunity to channel that energy toward free market goals, a calculated move. The 2010 midterm elections vindicated the strategy. Koch-aligned groups spent tens of millions targeting Democratic incumbents who had voted for the stimulus and the Affordable Care Act. The investment paid off. AFP alone claimed to have spent $45 million on ads and grassroots organizing, while network donors underwrote independent expenditures. A study noted 62 of 87 new Republican freshmen received Koch-aligned support. At the state level, Koch-backed organizations funded the Republican State Leadership Committee's Red Map project, focused on winning control of state legislatures to redraw congressional district lines after the 2010 census. The gerrymandered maps that followed helped insulate Republicans from electoral swings for a decade, entrenching Koch-friendly majorities. Buoyed by success, the network set its sights on defeating Obama in 2012. Freedom Partners pledged to raise almost $400 million for the cycle, coordinating with groups like Americans for Prosperity, COSOD's GPS, and the American Future Fund. The fundraising was relentless. They invested heavily in data analytics, using I-360 to micro-target persuadable votes in swing states, bankrolling a barrage of negative ads, linking Obama to unemployment and rising debt. A sophisticated attack. Yet, despite the immense spending, Obama won re-election. In the post-mortem, Charles and his advisors concluded that attacking candidates without offering a positive alternative had limitations. Demographic shifts were also recognized. To broaden the coalition, the network launched initiatives like the Libre Initiative to court Hispanic votes and Generation Opportunity to reach millennials, blending community services with messaging about entrepreneurship and school choice. In 2013, congressional Republicans, pressured by Tea Party activists, insisted government funding include defunding the Affordable Care Act. The impasse led to a 16-day government shutdown, a tense standoff. Initially, Koch-aligned groups supported headline tactics. AFP blasted Democrats, but as public opinion soured and polls blamed Republicans, the network quietly urged lawmakers to reopen government and pivot. The episode illustrated the fine line the Kochs walked, mobilizing grassroots urge without letting it spill into actions that could damage the economy of the Republican band, a delicate balance of power. The 2014 midterms restored momentum. The network announced it would spend nearly $300 million. AFP, Libre Initiative, and Concerned Veterans for America launched sophisticated field programs in battleground states. They opposed Democratic senators who had backed cap and trade and the Affordable Care Act. Their ads highlighted rising insurance premiums and linked Democrats to Obama. Republicans captured the Senate and expanded their House majority. In states like Kansas, AFP successfully defended Republican Governor Sam Brownback's tax cuts by overwhelming critics with ads and canvassing. Their state-level machinery was highly effective. The victories convinced many in the political class that the Koch network was, in effect, a parallel party apparatus, one that could swing congressional control and determine the composition of state governments, an unprecedented force. By the mid-2010, the Koch network had matured into a political juggernaut rivaling the Republican National Committee. Its influence extended through multiple avenues: campaign spending, lobbying, grassroots, litigation, and policy development. Koch Industries' Political Action Committee donated millions to candidates, overwhelmingly Republican, with particular attention to those who backed deregulation and tax cuts. Their support was strategic and targeted. In 2010, the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision freed corporations and unions to spend unlimited sums in elections. The Koch network seized the opportunity, unleashing its full financial power. Dono contributions flowed, though super PACs and 501 for organizations that could aise and spend unlimited funds with little disclosure. They fundraising goals approached 900 million, comparable to a major political party. Americans faux prosperity and television ads in Senate and House, aces across the county. Freedom partners funneled money to organizations that crafted model legislation such as ALEC, which wrote conservative bills introduced wholesale. The network supported efforts to relax restrictions on guns, oppose expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and promote vote ID laws. Their agenda was clear and far-reaching. Interestingly, the Koch's approach to presidential politics was often ambivalent. They disliked Donald Trump's protectionist trade policies, isolationist leanings, and personal style in 2016, focusing instead on congressional aces. After Trump won, the Kochs worked with his administration on their priorities, like tax cuts and deregulation, but opposed him on immigration and trade tariffs. By 2020, they largely stayed out of the presidential contest. In 2023 and 2024, the network publicly signaled it would not support Trump's quest for the White House, preferring candidates who, in their view, embodied fiscal conservatism and free market principles. A clear break. The Koch networks each extended into the courts. It funded legal advocacy organizations that brought cases challenging campaign finance regulations, environmental rules, and labor laws. Their legal strategy was pervasive. The both brothers also supported the Federalist Society, which vets candidates for judicial appointments and promotes originalist interpretations of the Constitution. Through such efforts, the network aimed to shape the judiciary. Over decades, this strategy bore fruit as courts struck down campaign finance restrictions, curtailed the power of regulatory agencies, and expanded corporate speech rights. A quiet yet profound legal evolution. While critics painted it as a malign influence, the Kochs and their allies argued they were exercising constitutional rights to free speech and association. Their spending, they maintained, aimed to protect individual liberty and economic freedom. Opposing subsidies for renewable energy, fighting Medicaid expansion, or challenging union power were, in their telling, principled stances rather than self-serving. They saw themselves as champions of a cause. Yet, even some conservatives found the scale of the network's influence unsettling. Republican politicians tread carefully, grateful for Koch money, but wary of crossing donors whose financial power could make or break campaigns. The Trump years tested the network's independence. In 2017, as Congress debated a sweeping tax code overhaul, Americans' faux prosperity unleashed a $20 million campaign to support the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. AFP's ads touted low corporate rates, while its canvases knocked on doors, urging constituents to call their representatives. Charles Koch personally phoned wavering senators. Their influence was direct and impactful. When the bill passed, dropping the corporate tax rate, the network celebrated. David Koch boasted of close White House work. Critics noted Koch Industries stood to save over $1 billion annually from the cuts, a clear benefit. The episode showed the transactional nature of the relationship. The network would support measures aligning with its economic agenda while opposing Trump on trade and immigration. A pragmatic, issue-based alliance. In the 2018 midterms, the network experimented with a bipartisan approach. AFP endorsed a handful of centrist Democrats who favored free trade and immigration reform, including Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. It spent money to protect senators like Jeff Flake and Dean Heller, who had crossed Trump on trade. It also ran issue campaigns supporting the First Step Act, a criminal justice reform bill showcasing a broad focus. The bill passed with unusual bipartisan support. giving the network a talking point about building bridges across ideological divides. Nevertheless, Republicans lost the House, revealing limits in a polarized environment. During the 2020 election cycle, the Koch network stayed largely on the sidelines. When Trump and many Republicans questioned Biden's victory, AFP spoke with the president, condemning the January 6th storming of the Capitol. The network urged activists to move on to policy debates and avoid conspiracy theories. It continued to lobby Congress on immigration reform, occupational licensing, and COVID-19 relief, often supporting bipartisan positions. Its criminal justice initiative pushed for police accountability measures after George Floyd's murder, working with liberal groups to limit qualified immunity. This unbundling of issues confused some conservatives, accusing them of abandonment. But for Charles Koch, it was consistent with the long-term strategy of focusing on policies rather than party loyalty. Principles, not partisanship, were his ultimate guide. Subsequent election cycles illustrated both resilience and equilibration. In the 2022 midterms, the network invested heavily, but several P-feed candidates lost. Analysts speculated that data operation struggled with post-Trump alignments. Then, in the 2024 Republican primary, AFP Action endorsed Nikki Haley over Donald Trump, spending millions. When Haley withdrew, the network faced a choice: oppose Trump again and risk irrelevance, or reconcile. A pivotal moment. In January 2025, it was reported that Americans for Prosperity launched a $20 million lobbying campaign to renew Trump's expiring tax cuts and roll back environmental regulations. A leaked prospectus described a Herculean undertaking. The campaign involved digital ads, podcasts, and door-knocking. The letter argued extending the cuts would benefit low- and middle-income Americans, but acknowledged that corporations like Koch Industries would reap windfalls. Observers noted that after years of tension, Charles Koch appeared ready to walk hand in glove with Trump when it suited his interests. Meanwhile, the internal financial machinery of the network tuned on becomes observers noted that after years of tension, Charles Koch appeared ready to walk hand in glove with Trump when it suited his interests. Meanwhile, the internal financial machinery of the network tuned on is greater than observers noted that after years of tension, Charles Koch appeared easy to work hand in glove with Trump when it suited his interests. Meanwhile, the internal financial machinery of the network churned on, converting numbers to words. Years is greater than years is the correct word form. The correct response is. Observers noted that after years of tension, Charles Koch appeared easy to work hand in glove with Trump when it suited his interests. Meanwhile, the internal financial machinery of the network churned on. A 2025 analysis found that in 2023, the Koch fleet of non-profits spent a combined $833 million influencing public policy, the highest ever. The network comprised 34 organizations with assets of $8.2 billion. More than 95% of expenditures went to policy and politics. Only 4.6% qualified as purely charitable. The Stand Together Chamber of Commerce alone spent $363 million, of which $156 million went to Americans for Prosperity. The report underscored how intertwined the charitable and political arms remained. Grants flowed between entities in the same building, consultants served both, and data companies like I-360 collected vote information while serving corporate clients. In effect, the Koch network functioned as a privately financed political party with a philanthropic facade, a powerful, sophisticated, and often unseen force in American democracy. One of the most striking facets of the Koch brothers' public image is the juxtaposition of their political activism with their philanthropic giving. Both Charles and David cultivated reputations as generous benefactors. They donated hundreds of millions to universities, hospitals, museums, and cultural institutions. David Koch, who developed prostate cancer in the early 1990s, became a passionate supporter of medical research. In 2007, he pledged $100 million to MIT to establish the David H. Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research, a facility that brings scientists and engineers together to develop new treatments, becoming a flagship program. Over his lifetime, David donated $134 million to MIT for cancer research and facilities, making him one of the university's most significant benefactors. He also gave substantial gifts to other top medical centers. And Charles's foundation undertook programs teaching entrepreneurship, civics, and economics at universities and high schools, shaping young minds with free market principles. Koch foundations have endowed research centers for the study of free enterprise at dozens of universities, provided scholarships and fellowships, and supported community initiatives that promote job training and youth development. To allies, these donations exemplify genuine commitments to science, culture, and economic opportunity. To skeptics, they are public relations investments that sometimes carry ideological conditions, a dual narrative. In recent years, the brothers have folded most of their charitable efforts into the Stand Together umbrella, which funds criminal justice reform, poverty alleviation, and education innovation, a strategic rebranding. Even these initiatives, however, reflect a preference for private solutions over public programs, blurring the line between charity and advocacy. Their ideology permeates all their actions. For all the philanthropy and claimed devotion to liberty, the Koch brothers have attracted intense criticism. Environmentalists, labor advocates, and progressives accuse them of subverting democracy, denying climate science, and entrenching corporate power. Evidence shows that from the late 1990s, though the mid-2010, the Kochs funneled tens of millions of dollars to organizations promoting climate change denial. Their impact on the climate debate was significant. These funds went to think tanks and font groups that challenged the scientific consensus that human activity causes global warming and lobbied against policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Critics argue this delayed crucial action. Koch Industries itself faced numerous environmental and safety violations. In 2000, the company agreed to pay $30 million in fines and $5 million in environmental projects after admitting it violated the Clean Water Act. Investigations uncovered Koch Pipeline Company reported 300 oil spills between 1990 and 1997, releasing over 3 million gallons of crude oil. In 1999, a federal jury found Koch Industries guilty of concealing benzene emissions. Workers at Koch facilities also suffered industrial accidents, leading to lawsuits and fines. Such incidents fueled the perception that the company prioritized profit over environmental and worker safety. A damning indictment. Labor unions have long viewed the Kochs as adversaries. The network poured money into campaigns to weaken collective bargaining rights, reduce public sector pensions, and promote right-to-work laws, a direct assault on organized labor. In Wisconsin, unions allied against Governor Walker's legislation, seeing it as a coordinated attack orchestrated by wealthy donors. The Koch network's involvement in drafting model legislation, though ALEC intensified suspicions. Critics contended that Koch insists rewriting laws behind closed doors and handing them to compliant legislators. Allegations of hypocrisy also dogged the brothers, championing free markets yet benefiting from subsidies. Some of their businesses, such as ethanol production, participated in tax credit programs. When facing litigation, they sometimes sought regulatory relief. Opponents use such examples to argue that the Koch's libertarian heroic masked self-interest. Investigative journalists exposed the extent of the network's secrecy. Jane May's Dark Money detailed how the Kochs and allied donors used layers of non-profit organizations to obscure political spending. Transparency was a constant battle. In 2014, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid devoted floor speeches to denouncing the brothers by name, accusing them of trying to buy elections. Democratic candidates routinely invoked the Kochs in fundraising appeals, portraying them as boogeymen. The both brothers responded to criticism with a mixture of defiance and adaptation. Charles insisted that his political spending aimed to promote a society where people could pursue their dreams without government interference. A consist vision. He argued policies like lower taxes, deregulation, and school choice would benefit everyone, especially the poor. David described himself as socially liberal, emphasizing his support for same-sex marriage and criminal justice reform. By the late 2010, the network sought to soften its image by highlighting cross-ideological initiatives. It partnered with the American Civil Liberties Union and liberal philanthropist George Soros to advocate for prison reform. It supported efforts to reduce occupational licensing burdens, which can trap low-income workers. These moves did not mollify all critics, but signaled a strategic shift towards broader appeal, or perhaps necessity. Some of the most troubling incidents involved public safety. In 1996, a pipeline operated by Koch exploded near Lively, Texas, igniting a fireball that killed 2 teenagers. Investigators later found corrosion and inadequate maintenance were factors. The family of one victim sued and won a multi-million-dollar settlement. In another case, a 1989 explosion on a Koch-owned gas line killed 2 workers. These were given examples of industrial risks. For 4 years, the company fought regulatory attempts to impose strict inspection regimes on old pipelines, arguing voluntary programs sufficed. Critics cited these tragedies as evidence that profit motives outweighed safety concerns. While Koch officials maintained they were leaning from accidents and investing in new monitoring technologies, evidence of the Koch's role in propagating climate disinformation continued to pile up, becoming undeniable. A 2010 report by Greenpeace identified the Koch network as one of the leading funders of climate change denial, estimating that between 1997 and 2010, it spent over $30 million supporting 35 organizations. A late analysis placed the figure close to $127 million. Recipients included the Heritage Foundation, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heartland Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and the Cato Institute, a wide each. These groups produced white papers and ads and organized conferences questioning whether human activity caused warming. The strategy mimed tactics used by tobacco companies, sow doubt about scientific consensus to delay regulation. The Kochs defended their funding, arguing dissent is essential to scientific progress and that climate policies could harm economic growth. To environmentalists, such claims were simply a cover for protecting fossil fuel profits. The opacity of the network's funding mechanisms fueled concerns about undue influence. Dono's Trust and Dono's Capital Fund functioned as clearinghouses for wealthy conservatives to anonymously support various causes. Because donor identities remained hidden, it was difficult to assess whether a handful of individuals were steering public policy. A 2011 prank phone call between a journalist impersonating David Koch and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker revealed much. The conversation appeared to confirm the closeness of the relationship. Walker thanked David for his support, joked about his private plane, and vowed to crush the unions. The call became a viral sensation, reinforcing the narrative. Walker dismissed the incident as a practical joke, but the damage to the network's public image was. Union leaders argued that the Koch's devotion to right-to-work laws and deregulation amounted to an assault on workers. Americans for Prosperity supported legislation that limited collective bargaining for public employees, restricted union dues, and weakened minimum wage laws. In Michigan and West Virginia, AFP's lobbying helped enact right-to-work statutes. The network also backed aggressive redistricting efforts that concentrated political power in conservative hands. Such maneuvers underscored accusations that the Koch project was less about free markets and more about cementing the political dominance of a wealthy few. The 2010 brought significant changes for the Koch empire. In 2018, David Koch retired from his roles due to declining health. He died in August 2019 at the age of 79, making the end of an era. For decades, the public face of the brothers had been the twin persona of Charles and David, and critics often used the plural Koch brothers. After David's death, the network urged journalists to use Koch Network or Stand Together. Around the same time, Charles Koch announced the network would reorient its focus. In 2019, he unveiled Stand Together, a philanthropic community intended to support organizations addressing issues like poverty and addiction. The branding was famed as a turn away from partisan politics and toward coalition building. The network would still support limited government, but it would also back initiatives with broad ideological appeal, seeking common ground. Stand Together provided grants to non-partisan non-profits, mentored social entrepreneurs, and funded programs aimed at helping people exit poverty. It continued to operate Americans for Prosperity and other advocacy arms, but the emphasis shifted. The emphasis shifted toward bottom-up solutions that did not depend on legislative battles. The network's relationship with electoral politics evolved, seeking impact beyond election cycles. During the 2020 cycle, it invested in congressional races, but refrained from endorsing Donald Trump. In the 2024 presidential primaries, it briefly supported Nikki Haley before withdrawing, a complex, evolving strategy. By 2025, as political polarization deepened and the Republican Party remained dominated by Trump's populist stain, the Koch network focused on preventing unified democratic control of government. Its super PACs poured money into Senate and House races to keep Congress divided. At the same time, the network supported immigration reform, free trade agreements, and criminal justice initiatives, often at odds with the Republican base. Charles Koch, now in his late 80s, began to contemplate the future of his enterprise and legacy. He had no interest in turning Koch Industries into a public company, committed to private control. There was talk of a new generation of leads within the network. Charles's only son, Chase, involved in Koch disruptive technologies, signaled interest in high-tech startups than traditional fossil fuels, a potential generational shift. As global energy markets shifted toward renewables, Koch Industries made strategic investments in battery technology, robotics, and data analytics, hedging against long-term decline in oil demand, adapting to a changing world. The story of the Koch brothers thus enters a new chapter, one without David, with a network seeking to shed its partisan image, and with a family contemplating succession. Yet, the invisible empire they built endures. The institutions they funded continue to shape debates over taxation, regulation, education, and civil liberties. The politicians they helped elect legislate in ways aligned with their philosophy. Their legacy is deeply embedded. The philanthropic endeavors they endowed bear their names and values. Critics remain vigilant, warning that behind benevolent branding lies a determination to keep governments small. Admirers celebrate their commitment to individual freedom. In evaluating the Koch legacy, one must grapple with its contradictions. the power of private enterprise to create wealth and philanthropy to fund breakthroughs, yet also how concentrated wealth can influence democratic processes in opaque ways. The story is a cautionary tale about the entanglement of economic might and political power in modern America. Much as the Carnegie family's steel-forged weapons and shaped empires, the Koch brothers' fortune forged policy and invaded American politics. Both legacies challenge us to reflect on the responsibilities that accompany great wealth. To whom is it owed, and how should it be exercised? The answers, contested and evolving, will define the invisible empires of the future. In the late 2010, the Koch network sought to soften its edges. Under the Stand Together banner, it funded non-profits working on poverty, addiction, education, and criminal justice reform, holding dialogues that brought activists from left and right into the same rooms. Charles Koch co-authored a book urging cooperation and lamenting past divisiveness. Yet questions about the empire's future remain. The path ahead is uncertain, but the impact is undeniable. The next generation, led by Charles's son, Chase, is more interested in venture capital, AI, and social enterprise than oil pipelines. Externally, the network confronts a world moving toward renewable energy and demanding greater transparency. Whether the Koch apparatus can pivot toward a low-carbon future, maintain influence without alienating emerging votes, and balance its free market creed with a broader social conscience is uncertain. A complex challenge. What is clear is that the brothers built an infrastructure that will outlive them, leaving the county to reckon with the tension between wealth, ideology, and democracy long after they are gone. Their invisible empire casts a long shadow,